Today's reading is from Mark's 9th chapter. It's the story of the Transfiguration, which was pretty well detailed in our first hymn. If you think back on it, we probably should have sung the hymn after we heard the story. But this is a rather unusual tale of Jesus with friends going to the mountaintop and then coming down again. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice, "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they'd seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So ends the reading of God's holy word. Let us pray. Gracious God, we listen to the words of the sacred text each week, and we do so with our minds and with our hearts. We take in the story and we take in the message. Sometimes the story is rather amazing, perhaps even unbelievable. Today may be one of those stories. Help us to remain open, even as incredible as this tale may be, open to the way in which you speak to us in the very concrete details of our living through this sacred story. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. Life is full of highs and lows. No big secret to any of us. Sometimes all in the same place. Bear with me as I sort of bring those two terms together, highs and lows. As an example, perhaps one of the most magical places in the United States is a place we call Disney World. It's near Orlando, Florida. It's a place where imaginations fly high, fantasies take wing, all for the modest ticket price of $132 a day. In terms of soaring flights of fancy, not to mention the ticket prices, you don't get much higher than Disney World. On the other hand, in a physical sense, in terms of elevation, the very highest point of the spire of the Magic Kingdom wouldn't poke through the bottom of Canandaigua Lake in terms of elevation. It's a study in contrasts. Here's another study. It's a tiny mountainous country in Africa called Lesotho, nestled in the high peaks of southern Africa. Its lowest point is a little bit higher than White-Faced Mountain's peak. In terms of elevation, Lesotho is a nation just about higher than any other on Earth. Geographically, that is. Economically, it's a whole different story. If you took the wages of an average Lesotho person, it would probably amount to about $3,600 a year. Or to put it another way, if you're from Lesotho and you're lucky enough to somehow get to Disney World, you'll be laying out about 2 weeks of wages for that one ticket to the Magic Kingdom. No Epcot. All the highs and lows in one place. And the close proximity of the highs and lows of life is no big news to us. We live it all the time. The lowest form of cruelty, such as the trade tower attacks, bring out often the highest form of human heroism. The deepest moments of human suffering often elicit the greatest expressions of compassion and kindness. Time and time again, the highs and the lows intermingle. In the story of Jesus and the Transfiguration, we see it again in a certain sense. He takes his friends to a high mountain where they encounter first the pillars of the Jewish faith, Moses and Elijah, and then the very appearance of God Almighty. And in the presence of this inexpressibly holy God, Jesus becomes dazzling white. And Peter, for all his lovable humanity, pipes up with an ever so awkward offer to pitch tents. Go figure. But really, we might want to cut Peter some slack, because who really knows what to say in the presence of the ineffable? I don't. Here's an example. Just stand in line at calling hours for a loved one and listen with compassionate ears to what people say to you. No one knows what to say. So things come out like, they did a nice job with their hair. How are you feeling? I hear we're going to get snow. There just aren't words in situations like that. So Peter, like everyone else, simply fell prey to that compulsion to don't just stand there, say something. And he did. Let's pitch some tents. Might make L.L. Bean happy, but it really is pretty irrelevant. But in all fairness to Peter, a body just doesn't see a glowing Jesus every day. Mountaintop experiences of all kinds draw us up short of words, short of understanding. For every heavenly encounter, there is a very earthly and often inadequate response. Tremendous power in our mountaintop experiences. Dr. Martin Luther King spoke of having been to the mountaintop. And like Moses, even at the time, he wasn't really sure he'd get to the promised land of racial equality and justice. And he did. But he caught a glimpse. And sometimes that's all we need. Glimpses can give us the power to keep working, keep trying, keep believing, even if we don't get perhaps a precise blueprint of how to get there. We see where we want to go, and that's key. One of the precious gifts of mountains is the perspective that they offer. You can see for miles. And you can often see both the obstacles and the assets that lie before you. But of course, it's also pretty hard to live up there. The air gets thin, the winds are brutal, and it can be really hard to grow much on a mountaintop. I may be wrong, but I doubt there's a garden on top of Mount Marcy. Maybe, but I'm sure there isn't one on top of Mount Everest. At 29,000 feet, there isn't even much air. The high points in life come in all shapes and sizes and places. As noted, a trip to the lowlands of Orlando, Florida can yield high points of memory to last a lifetime. Sometimes we find inspiration in a visit to a breathtaking national park or pounding surf, or maybe the soaring strains of a good concert. We may not see Moses and Elijah or Jesus, but we can just as surely feel the rush of the presence of God as our souls are, in some sense, transfigured. The trick in all of this, and in going to these mountaintop experiences, is to carry that power down the mountain. into the flatlands of daily life. Back to Lesotho for a moment. In that community, they spent years digging a trench from the foothills of the mountain down to the village far below in order to access the life-giving power of water. It was a project that was accomplished with picks and shovels and hoes. And with the shared labors of countless men and women, the deed was eventually done. And all of that tremendous effort from the community culminated in a very humble 4-inch PVC pipe issuing out into a pretty humble-looking cistern. And yet, a cistern that gave great life to the entire community and great hope. At some point years before, someone must have hatched this notion of a water line coming all the way down from the mountain. And we can only imagine the blistering skepticism when that idea was first broached. You must be crazy. Most radically good ideas are met with that kind of reception. Pretty common. But in those moments when the ideas are hatching, what is needed most is people who are passionate with their vision, who do not give up hope. We don't need people who want to set up tents and encapsulate good ideas for the benefit of only a few way up on top of the mountain. We do need people who are fiercely committed to bringing that goodness down the mountain to everybody. One of the reasons that our Lenten soup suppers are free and that we don't charge the Disney World going rate of $132 per person is because we want these gifts of food and fellowship and healing to be available to all people, especially those of modest means. The stresses of life are hard, and they're even harder for those whose daily challenges are overlaid with poverty. After God had affirmed the ministry of Jesus up on the mountain, and the disciples were hiking back down the mountain with their heads still swimming with what they'd seen, Jesus insists that they not speak of it till he was gone. Why did he do that? Hard to know for sure. But it is pretty true that it's easy to traffic in the spectacular, to cash in on one's encounters with the extraordinary, make friends, make money. Just think of the tabloids. Boy abducted by aliens. Within a week, the boys are rich because everybody's on the backyard wanting to hear about the story. To his credit, Peter evidently did not immediately rush to the Jerusalem Times and dump his story on the salivating press corps. He returned to the flat land of ordinary life, continued to listen and to learn and to serve with Jesus. He didn't always get it right, but he kept trying. The one hazard of going to the top, to the mountaintop, is the temptation to look down on ordinary life once you've had a mountaintop experience. There's nothing quite so ruthless as a dream. Because once you catch a dream, the distance between what is and what might be can seem enormous and discouraging. And despair can set in. And that's precisely when we need to join our friends in Lesotho, pick up our shovel, and take another swipe out of the dirt. And move that water line another 10 feet down toward the cistern. Hold fast to the dream, but get to work. A little over 50 years ago, a tiny Scotch pine seedling came home in a paper cup. It was part of Arbor Day. A lot of schools are doing it. Thousands of children brought home those little tiny trees. This one was planted. It now soars 30, 35 feet into the air, shelters wildlife, absorbs carbon dioxide, and it graces the view. Who knew? But somebody along the line must have inspired that little red-haired schoolgirl to bring that seedling home and plant it. Somebody that had in some sense been to the mountaintop and was willing to coax that dream into reality back in the lowlands. So my prayer of gratitude to conclude is simply that I'm grateful for those people who bring dreams back down the mountain.